Welcome back. Good to see you, Richard.
Hey, it's October.
It is October.
October, November, December. Busy holiday season coming up.
It's on its way. It's right around the
Can't
corner.
believe it, but here we are.
Yeah. Well, this week we are going to sort of continue our conversation from last week. Last week we talked about the book, Who's Raising the Kids?
Right.
It's that Susan Lynn's book about big media, I guess we could call it, social media platforms and things, and the interactions they have with our kids. And we're going to continue that conversation today.
Yeah, what Lynn's axe, she has a particular axe to grind, and I don't mean that in any pejorative way, but hers is that, hey, look, this is about advertising. When we were children, we watched TV and we remember all the cereal ads and all the toy ads and everything. And that became a congressional issue. I mean, the Congress finally had to address that whole issue about advertising to children. And she said now social media has become the great advertiser, and that what all this is about, what all that social media is about, is keeping you on screen so that you are exposed to the advertisements. Okay, right. That's just as it was with TV. She makes two other good points. One is that the difference now is that kids are spending so much time on devices that it's robbing them of play and other positive activities. And also, the other difference with social media is that social media produces very powerful emotions, but there's nobody, the parents aren't there. When kids are on social media, they're typically on alone or with their friends, and the parents aren't there to moderate the emotions that social media is creating. And so right. It's the absence of play and the absence of parents that she also mentions as concerns. Today's podcast, though, is a little bit more, it has a little bit more of an alarming tone, not alarmist, but an alarming tone, because this author suggests that social media is not just sinister and dishonest. Lynn compares social media to the characters from fairy tales, the big bad wolf. He said, they promise you good things, but they really have sinister ends in mind for your children. Yeah. But this guy said, no, it's not just sinister, it's actually dangerous. And what he talks about in this article is what he calls a digital social contagion of mental illness, that it's not a biological contagion, it's a digital social contagion. And that's what this article talks about. And he right. said that it's the digital social contagion that's responsible for the rapid increase in addiction, depression, suicide, and gender dysphoria, especially among especially among teenagers of all
right.
ages.
Yeah, the title of the article is How Social Media is Literally Making Teens Mentally Ill, and it's right. By Dr. Nicholas Kardaras.
Kardaras, yeah. Mm-hmm. He's from Austin, Texas. He's a psychologist, and this is his area of expertise, is these right. sorts of issues, how the effect of social media. He's written a couple of books on the topic. One of them is called Glow Kids. Have you ever seen a book called Glow Kids?
I haven't read that one.
I've seen it advertised, and he's the author of that. But he has another one about this connection between social media and the increased rates of mental illness in teenagers.
And we've talked about some of these issues many times before, because the term social media is somewhat of a misnomer, because research for years has demonstrated that social media is actually the opposite. People that tend to use social media more tend to be those who report feeling more lonely and feel less connected to other people. And so even though we tend to think of social media as something that connects us, the research has demonstrated that it's actually the opposite, that people who use it more feel less connected to others.
Are more isolated. Yeah, they're more sedentary, they're more isolated, right? Right. There's very little social, their meaning is different, right?
Right, right. And so, when we're kind of taking it to the next step and talking about the relationship between social media and mental health issues, mental illness, it's a natural connection because as we've talked about before, feelings of loneliness and disconnectedness from other people,
Right.
it is one of the main contributors to mental health problems like depression and anxiety and things
Yeah.
like that.
And his article is real. It's consistent with our clinical
Right.
experience, and we keep saying, do all these kids really have a mental illness? Is it possible that all these kids could have? And the other question that we are asked by many parents, by many teachers, is why does it seem like so many kids want to be gay or trans or bisexual? Why does there seem to be this epidemic of gender dysphoria? And he said it's the same problem. But those are questions that we're asked. And the answer to those questions is probably not. Are there really more kids who are gay today than there were a generation ago? And is there more mental illness now than there was 20 years ago? The answer is probably not. We have increased statistics, but I'm not sure we have increased cases. Okay.
Well, yeah. And I think that, it's so difficult because you have to balance, and Richard, we talked about this so many times before, you have
Sure.
to balance between, the statistics are higher, but are the rates really higher? Well,
Right.
today people are maybe feel much more comfortable coming out or talking about mental health
Right.
issues or
That's
talking
right.
about gender related issues or sexuality related issues. They're much more likely to talk about those things now than they may have been 20, 30 years ago. And so,
Absolutely. Right.
so it's difficult to know if there's more cases now than there were before, if there were more cases before and we just didn't know about it,
Mhm.
or how much of it again is related to social media and just the exposure to these other types of these other lifestyles
Mhm.
that could be that kids and teenagers may be emulating in different ways for to feel a sense of connectedness or to feel a sense of community because
Right.
if I identify this way as ADHD, as depressed, as trans, there's now a community that I can connect to when I didn't feel like I could connect to a community before.
Yeah, there were such severe social sanctions against some of these things. I mean, nobody wanted to have a mental illness 20 years ago. Nobody wanted to be considered gay 20. I mean, we talk about coming out of the closet and you had to stay hidden and you wouldn't dare admit that. I mean, we were all sort of homophobic a generation ago, and rightfully so because bad things could happen to you physically and socially if you admitted that you were gay. And today, that sanction no longer exists. People aren't afraid to say that they are.
Or at least not to the same extent.
That's right. And so, and in certain places, I mean,
Right.
certain parts of the country, it's easier than others. So we don't pretend to have the answer to that question. Are they really increasing, or do we just
Right.
does it just seem as though they're increasing? But we do know this. What we do know is that with the onset of puberty, there are significant brain changes that occur in our species, boys and girls, when they hit puberty, and they have a range of powerful new emotions and feelings. Now, I think it's safe to assume that the feelings that I experienced as a teenager are probably very similar to the feelings and emotions that my children experienced or that this generation experiences. I think the feelings are the same.
Mhm.
But when we were growing up, we shared our feelings with a few close friends. I had 2 or 3 buddies that I could share things with them, but they didn't know anything more than I did about it. We were all sort of in the dark. I mean, we shared it with each other, but none of us knew very much.
Right. And grossly speaking, you guys were probably very similar. You
And we
probably
were. And
you
there were
probably came from very similar families, very similar backgrounds.
played on the same
Today,
teams.
right. And today it's very different because of social media, kids have connections with people well outside of
Right.
their immediate social circle. They have exposure to people all around the world. And because of that, they're exposed to far different ideas Again, many times you mentioned a moment ago that in some areas of the country, it's okay. It's more accepted to identify it in one community, whereas in other parts of the country, you have to be a little bit more careful because it's not as accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you have this exposure to people from all over the world, and you're exposed to these ideas from all over the world, it doesn't mean that those ideas are going to be accepted
Right.
in your immediate social community.
Right.
And it can lead to a lot of problems.
Right. Exactly. And so now what you have, when I was growing up, we had this little group of friends. I lived in a neighborhood, lower middle class neighborhood. Every man, all the fathers left every day, and all the mothers stayed home. Nobody in our neighborhood worked. No woman in our neighborhood worked. The men left, the women stayed, and the kids and the mothers stayed. That was our world. That's all. That's what we knew. Today, kids have the entire world literally at their fingertips.
Right.
Okay? So
Yeah.
the difference now is not that kids have different emotions. I think the emotions are the same. What they're feeling because of pubertal changes, those are the same. Today, they compare notes with many others, not just with close friends. They also do.
I was just saying the same thing. They also do their own research.
Right.
You go on Google and you can find anything. I mean, you can find information about anything that you're interested in. And so, somebody introduces an idea to you, introduces a word to you.
Right. That's a search term.
And that becomes a search term. And then all of a sudden you have something new that you are interacting with.
Right.
And we see this from a psychopathological perspective, because people will come in and, teenagers come in and they've self-diagnosed. And it's like, how do you even know what the word dissociate means?
Right.
And oftentimes they don't.
Right.
They can quote what they've read as a definition, but then as soon as you start to ask them about the pathological presentation of it, it's not anywhere close.
Right. Yeah, because they all go to Dr. Google, and they match what they're feeling with psychiatric diagnostic criteria. Now, Bernie, when I first started working, if I wanted to do that, I had to go to the medical school library.
Right.
I had to go up to the library, look it up in an index, and then go find something about it. That took some effort. Okay. Today, you can do that with a couple of keystrokes, and you can find the diagnostic criteria for any mental health disorder. That's only been possible since 1995. Okay. So we now have that capacity. So they collaborate with peers. And remember, we're talking about teenagers. And what are teenagers looking for? People with similar interests, their group, their tribe, where are my homies? Where do I find? Well, now you find your homies online. Now you find your tribe online, not just in the neighborhood. My tribe was my neighborhood and my school.
Right.
Today, your tribe can be anywhere in the world that you can affiliate with. And what kids are doing now is they're taking these diagnoses and they're taking their symptoms and they're connecting with other people, and they're finding what he calls mental health groups, which are kids with similar interests, concerns, emotions, and they're finding each other on social media, and they're forming these mental health groups, which is feeding this frenzy. That's validating what they're doing. Okay. And what they're learning is they're learning how to talk to parents and professionals. They're learning from each other how to talk to us, so that they can say, well, I don't enjoy things that I used to enjoy. That's right out of that's right out of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So they give us those symptoms so that they can get the treatments that they're looking for. So they're educating each other about how to talk to parents and professionals.
Right. And I don't think it's for the same purpose as, as we often think about, as far as, they're drug seeking, or they're looking for a particular treatment for some, some other. I think that they're truly experiencing some
absolutely
something. And they're just trying to make sense of it. And they don't like the way that it feels. And so they want help for it. And so if I feel this way, and these symptoms are associated with depression, then I must have depression. And so I need to explore that. I think that the other part of the problem with how social media tends to create mental illness is that, when everybody in your group is talking about things the same way, rarely does it stay at the same level, if
Right.
that makes sense. It's like, think about, if you're upset about something going on in politics. Well, as soon as you start talking to somebody else who's equally frustrated with what's happening in politics, before too long, before the conversation goes too far, now you're both a little bit more frustrated.
Right.
And you're both a little bit more frustrated, and you just keep skating more and more. The same thing happens when everybody that you're talking to has the same, is complaining about the same issues or problems as you are.
Right.
The symptoms get worse, and the symptoms get worse and worse and worse over time. And now all of a sudden you have a teenager or a kid who thinks that they are, you would think that they, if you looked at their testing, like if they did like an MMPIA or something like that, some type of testing, you would think that they are curled up in bed, barely functioning and not eating, and in the dark all day long every day. But yet they're going to school and they're doing all these things. So their perception of their symptoms continue to become more and more severe. Right. But they are more and more sort of severe or not. Right.
Yeah. And so it's sort of a digital feeding frenzy. You start whipping and you're right, it metastasizes and it becomes a frenzy of activity, and it does feed itself because you have this constant stimulation, constant reinforcement. And Kaddaras gives an example of one of his patients, 22-year-old girl who presents with depression, self-harm, and a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. Now, she was 22, I think, when he saw her, and she had this diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, which is more and more common diagnosis that we see today among youngsters, a lot of these personality disorders. Well, her symptoms are, she had black and white thinking, self-harming behaviors, emotional volatility, impulsive behavior, a shifting self-image, and feelings of emptiness. That's a teenager. Okay, as teenagers, we all experienced those feelings. Those are normal adolescent feelings that come and go as we mature through adolescence. So they put her into a treatment center, and within 2 weeks, her symptoms began to disappear. Well, it wasn't the treatment, it wasn't medication, it wasn't the treatment, because it takes more than 2 weeks. What they did is, when you go into these treatment centers, you don't have social media, you don't have an iPad, a cell phone, you get disconnected from the world. Right. And 2 weeks of that, and she was almost symptom free. Prior to admission, she was spending 12 to 15 hours a day on social media, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. That was her life. And she was a victim of this feeding frenzy that we just talked about. But in the age of, and so what Kaddaras is saying is that in this age of digital social contagion, we're transmitting these diseases to others. Right. The problem that he sees is the same problem that Lynn sees, that we talked about last week, is that social media is creating these big emotions, but there's nobody there to help the kids monitor those big emotions. They're created, but they're not monitored.
Right. And it makes sense that this is why we're seeing an increase in a lot of these symptoms and characteristics in youth, and why COVID made it even worse, because, when with COVID, everybody was at home. And so all we had was social media. The only way they could interact with anybody else was social media. So there was a significant increase in the use of social media during COVID. So, so between living their sedentary lives and they're becoming more and more isolated, they're using these devices and they're staying, plugged in and electronically connected to other people in the way that we were describing. And so it's no wonder that this general sense of malaise and this general sense of loneliness and all of these mental health issues are just becoming more and more exacerbated by all of these conditions.
Right. And so if you're still unconvinced, we of course have the congressional testimony of Frances Haugen. She's the woman from Instagram who said, "Yeah, we know that this stuff is compelling. We know that there are increases in eating disorders and self-harming behaviors, and and we know that being exposed to this constant content and comparing ourselves to others is creating this social comparison effect, which
Yeah.
is damaging to teenagers, especially vulnerable teenagers, not all. But so, what is it the developers want? And I think this is where we have two issues here. What do the developers want, and what can parents do?
Right.
And that's where we want to sort of wrap this up. Be saying, okay, what do developers want? What
Right.
developers want of these TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat,
Right.
what they want is to keep you on screen.
Right.
Because if Facebook can promise that I will have 20 million viewers and 5 million of them are going to be watching this, then that determines how much I can charge you to advertise your product. It's a little bit like the Super Bowl.
Right.
Super Bowl ads cost millions of dollars per minute. Okay.
Right.
But the 5 a.m. fishing show, that is on in some areas, you don't pay millions of dollars to advertise. And that's why there are different advertisers at 5 a.m. than there
Right.
are at the Super Bowl.
Right. And I think that what we now know too is that social media and things now are very different.
Right.
And maybe even in some ways much worse, not more worse, much
Can't be more
worse, because
It's worse. It's worse.
because they use algorithms,
Right.
and those algorithms can tailor certain ads to people who have certain interests.
Mhm.
So not only are they able to, sell advertising to say, you can be your ads will be seen by, this many people. They can also say by this many people who have interests that are likely purchasers or consumers of your product. And that significantly changes the game.
Right.
And it's what she was talking about with Instagram, because they tailor what you see on Instagram to fit what it is that you're interested in.
Yeah. So if you're looking up eating disorders, you're going to get a flood of stuff about eating disorders.
Right.
They know that about you. In the old TV days with cereal advertisements, for example, they were kind of thrown out there, and you hope that the kids are watching it. But today, you can tell what kind of cereal are you most likely to eat,
Right.
and you can
Right.
tailor your advertising that precisely because of their algorithms.
Yeah.
So what the companies want, what the social media platforms want, is they are seeking your attention. And
Mhm.
that's the priceless human commodity that they are at. They want you to attend, and they want you to stay attending to what they're presenting. Okay. And if your attention is there, it can't be somewhere else. When in this age of, well, why do so many kids have ADHD, or why do we have such short attention span? Because if you're spending 8 to 10 hours attending to one thing, you can't be attending to other things. Okay. So if this is where your attention is going, that's where your attention will be. And so the algorithms tell you what you're looking for, and you get this feedback loop of more and more things. And this is why he believes that there's been this spike in what were rare disorders. Bernie, when you were at USF in psychiatry, Tourette's was a very tiny portion of the population. Okay. And multiple personality disorders, almost never seen. I mean, you could spend an entire career in psychiatry and never see a person with multiple personality disorders. Now I have a couple kids a month coming in saying, well, I think I have multiple personality disorders. That's not possible.
Right.
Right? And the same with borderline.
Right.
And also with gender, there's a term for it, late onset gender dysphoria. Probably not likely. I mean, it
Right.
just doesn't make sense biologically that we would have a spike in these rare disorders until recently.
Right. Well, and like we said, before, these disorders, conditions, symptoms tend to disappear
Mhm.
when you remove some of that access to social media, and they lose access to that feedback cycle with the community that they've identified with on through
Right.
the social media. As soon as you unplug from that for a period of time, you see a lot of those symptoms start to dissipate, and they start to disappear. And I think that that's, again, when you're talking about authentic mental illness, that doesn't happen. It doesn't go away just because you unplugged.
Right.
It's like anything else. If you're sick because you're eating something that's not good for you, it's not
Mhm.
that you have some gastrointestinal disorder. It's because
Right.
you're eating something that's not good for you, that you're not agreeing with. You stop eating it and the symptoms go away.
Right.
It's
Or
the same way with mental health.
right, if you're in a job that you hate, I mean,
Right.
you cannot go to the office every day. And the problem is not that you're depressed. The problem is you're in the wrong career.
Right. Right.
So, and same with social media, you know.
Right.
Um, but you can imagine if you're a teenager, you have these feelings and you're getting this constant flood over and over and over. The brain is just going to be
Right.
overstimulated.
Right.
And that's what's happening to many of these teenagers. All teenagers, because they go through adolescence, because they have these feelings, they're all susceptible. And
Right.
if they get hooked into social media, it can be very difficult to pull them out.
Right.
So because what they're looking for is this group, this tribe.
Right.
Who else out there is like me?
Well, and I think that that's why when we think about what can parents do, we're kind of beyond the point of just taking social media away. That
Thank you for saying that.
it's not going to go
It's too
anywhere.
late.
Right.
Pandora's box is open, and it just is too late. You're not going to do anything. This is like, we just had a hurricane here, and everybody who lived along the coast said, move inland because there's nothing you can do about this wall of water that's going to come ashore. And it's the same with social media. There's nothing we can do about it. Now we have to learn how to manage it. Okay.
Right.
You're not going to cut it off. You can keep your children. I guess it's possible not to have a cell phone or an iPad or a computer. Kids are always going to have access. They'll have access when they go to visit their friends. Okay.
Right.
In the early days of TV, not everybody had a TV, but we would all go to somebody's house that did have a TV,
Right.
so eventually you were going to watch it. So it's too late to deprive kids of this. And if you deprive your kids of these things, they are going to be left out.
Right.
Most parents don't want their kids to be left out. Okay.
Right.
So it's too late to keep yourself isolated and apart from it. But you have to learn but we need to learn how to manage it.
Right. And you can do that, you do that by interacting with your kids and talking to them and helping them to develop sort of this immune system for what they're experiencing on social media. How do you deal with some of these issues, these problems that social media can present with, and balancing it. My goodness, balancing social media with actual social interactions.
Right.
You have to have both.
Right.
There's just no way around it now.
That's right.
They're going to have to be plugged into social media to some extent, because that's just the world that we live in now.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to create the opportunities, or make sure that they have the opportunities to interact in person and directly.
That's right. That's right. You can't do anything to stem this tsunami of social media. It's too late for that. It's going to be there. TikTok is the most recent, but there's something else going to come after TikTok. I mean, we know that now because we've seen this progression, and there's always something new and better that is going to get our interest and attention. A couple of years from now, TikTok will be what adults use, and kids will have some new platform that they're using. Right. So we can't prevent them from using these platforms or being exposed to these platforms. But what we can do is we can immunize our children from the social contagion. He calls it a digital social contagion. So just as we immunize ourselves from biological contagion, we can immunize ourselves from social contagion. And how do you do that? Well, number one, kids have to develop grit, what Susan Duckworth calls grit. And grit is you learn from your experiences, especially from your failures. You know, you get toughened up by confronting your challenges, not being protected, not having snowplow or lawnmower parents, but allowing children to experience disappointment and failure so they develop grit and internal strength. Okay. The second thing you have to do is kids have to find their place. I always like it when a kid comes in and I said, well, what do you do besides school? And he says, well, I play soccer and I'm in the band and they're engaged in other activities and they're developing confidence. One of the things I love about sports is you learn how to win and lose. You learn that doing your best might not end up with a win.
Right.
You learn disappointment. You'd like to play more, but you're not. You learn all those things on the athletic fields. Okay. I'd like for all children to have that experience, but many don't.
Right.
They go to school and they come home, and that's their life, you know.
And in that sense too, you know, it's important that we maintain a physical presence, that parents maintain a physical presence in the kids' lives, but that the kids maintain a physical presence in their life, you know, that physically present by engaging in some of these other activities, by going to, you know, after school events, by interacting with peers and going, you know, it sounds crazy, going to the mall, going to the movie theater, going to the bowling alley, you know, going out and engaging and interacting with other people. But you have to be active and proactive in making these things happen.
That's right. If kids are physically engaged, they can't also be on their phone. You know, we say you can only do one thing at a time. The more, you know, you take a kid who's playing soccer, at least for those how long are kids' game matches?
Oh, it depends on their age. Yeah.
60 minutes or
thereabouts.
So at least for that 60 minutes, they're not on their cell phones. Okay, They can't be. So the more physically engaged kids are, the less time they're spending on their devices and being sedentary.
Right. Another idea that was presented in the article is about encouraging them to read classics, read. Hold on to your socks, folks. Read books. You know,
when I read this one, I thought, wait a minute, let me make sure I understand this correctly. Read the classic. And I said, I don't even want to talk about that. I said, I'm going to eliminate this. I'm not even. Then I got to thinking about it. I said, you know, when he talks about the classics, he's talking about, you know, the Roman and Greek, you know, Socrates and especially the Roman, like Marcus Aurelius. There's some good stuff in there that's not cluttered up with current events and tweets and politics. Okay, it's just the human condition. And so I'm not going to ask my kids to read the classics, but I can read the classics.
Right.
What did the ancient thinkers, because they talked about the human condition, and we can pass that on to our children. There's wisdom there that we can pass on to our children. So we kept read the classics in for that reason.
Yeah. And also, you know, encouraging sort of related to being active and getting out and being involved is helping others, you know. There's some great programs where kids are involved in helping others. You know, you mentioned the hurricane, you know, helping others repair and be involved in the community that way. But also, you know, for parents to be involved with other people, talking to other parents and talking to other people about what they're doing. But it all of that takes it out of being so egocentric, so focused on the self, and recognizing that there are other people and others are going through some of the same stuff and everything.
Yeah, remember, social media is about narcissism. It's about self. It's about me. It's very me-centered. I want to find out about me. I want to entertain myself. I want to have fun. It's all about me, 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 me. And the antidote for that is have kids spend some time taking care of others.
Right.
Okay. This is what helps them manage the ego-centered social media with real life. And one way to do that is helping others.
Yeah.
And the last one is be creative and be bored.
Right.
And
We talked about that a little bit last week. Yeah.
right, we talked about that last week, is that, well, I'm bored. Good. That's a good thing. When your kids tell you I'm bored, that is a good thing, because boredom is the handmaiden of creativity. When you're bored, you'll figure out how to do things, and you'll figure out how to entertain yourself. That's not, when your child says I'm bored, that's not the parent's cue to jump in and become the entertainment. It is your cue to say, it's okay, you'll find something to do. Let them solve that problem themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, all right. I think that that's it for today. The link to the show is in the show notes for, so you can get to this article and check it out for yourself. We definitely encourage the read. All right. But again, that's it for today.
Yep.
We'll be back next week.
We will.
Yeah.
We will. Happy
No hurricane
October.
this week. No hurricane this week. So
We do some time changes this month, don't we?
Yep.
All back, gain an hour. So go ahead and wear yourself out in October. You get an extra hour of sleep somewhere in the month. Okay.
Sometime. All right.
Welcome to
That's
fall.
it.
Okay.
Until next time. All right. Stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.